So this is the segment that is going to talk to us today and tell us more about IIT and what is happening. Ashwin, may I invite Ashwin to come and give the address. Just as a word of introduction, Mahesh is the current Dean of ACR, and he's had 6 wonderful years. And Ashwin is the Dean-designate, so they will share more information about what they've done and what they plan to do.
Sure. Thanks, Naren. Morning, everyone. I think I've met most of you between last night and this morning. Looking forward to meet those of you I haven't met yet, but it's a pleasure to be back here and telling people this is a bit of a homecoming, because in between my first avatar as a student at IIT Madras and my second as a faculty, I spent 8 years in the Bay Area. So it's nice to come back and see a lot of familiar faces. So I'm from the class of 98. Currently, I'm a professor at the Department of Civil Engineering at IIT Madras, and shortly will take over as the Dean of Alumni and Corporate Relations. So you'll see and hear a lot more from me in the years to come. But I wanted to just sort of tell you a little bit about what's going on at IIT Madras today. All of us are alumni of IIT Madras, went through various programs, and I thought it'd be interesting for all of you to sort of see where we are. So we have a few slides which I would request slides to come on. Okay. All right. So hope everyone can see the slides. And the bottom is not really being blocked off, but I think that's okay. I can talk through. Is this okay? Great. Okay. Thanks. So so just a bit of an overview on IIT Madras first before we get down to some of the exciting things that are happening. So could I have the next slide, please? Okay. So again, depending on which vintage you are, these numbers could be very, very different from when you were a student. Today, well, in the late 90s when I graduated, we had roughly about 2,500 students on campus. Roughly about 1,500 were undergraduate, maybe another 1,000 were graduate. Today we have 11,000 students on campus. So from that time we've grown 4x. If you had graduated earlier, the numbers would be much higher. Thank you so much. We now have 18 different departments at IIT Madras. We just added 2 new departments this year, which I'll talk about in just a second. And when IIT Madras started off in the sort of in the late 50s, early 60s, it started off a little bit as an undergraduate teaching institution where undergraduate teaching was the main focus. Today, it's really more of a graduate-focused research institution. So while we still do a lot of teaching, there's a lot of research and outreach that also happens. And we've got, probably again, depending on when you were here, large number of faculty, 700 odd faculty today. We've been very fortunate that we've been ranked as the _1 institution in India for the for the last several years, both in the engineering category but also in the overall category. In fact, at least in the engineering category, we've not known what it's like not to be ranked #1. So from the time the rankings came out, we've been adjudged the best institution in the country. And this is because of a variety of things that have been happening. And so I'm going to talk to you a little bit about what we've been doing on campus. I've got essentially this segmented into 4 sort of buckets. There's a lot that we're doing on just developing the infrastructure in campus. There's a lot of steps that we're taking towards greater internationalization of our programs. We are focusing a lot on how we attract and groom better talent, both in terms of the students, the faculty, the staff. And finally, I'll talk a little bit about the kind of research that we're doing that is making a little bit of an impact in the world. So in terms of infrastructure, again, like I said, we've got in the last 20 odd years, we've sort of increased our student intake 4x. We've increased our faculty intake by probably 2 times. And so there's been a need to develop not just hostel infrastructure, but all other kinds of infrastructure as well, including things like, so we've got a brand new indoor sports complex that we've developed because all of our sporting facilities are extremely oversubscribed given the number of students that we have. We've got several new academic buildings that have come up to house the new departments we've created, the classrooms. We've got a lot of the students these days spend their time on extracurricular pursuits that are related to engineering broadly. So one of the ways in which they do that is through this thing called the Center for Innovation, which is a student club that was first generously set up by a grant from the 1981 batch, but then has also taken off a life of its own. So recently we developed a new innovation hub on campus. So if you come to campus now and you've been away for anything more than a decade, you'll find that the landscape has shifted drastically. Several sort of new buildings have come up, new facilities. Several of the old ones still remain, but in slightly different forms. So we still have the equivalent of Quark, but it's very different now. You don't sit on those concrete cubes anymore. They're actually, you've got nice seating, it rains, it's covered, there's space for students to do activities. So there's a lot of new infrastructure that we've developed on campus, and a lot of it through generous support from alumni. We are moving towards internationalization both within and outside of campus. So on the one hand, we have an aspirational goal of having 10% of both our faculty and student population be international. We actually have a fair number of international students on our campus, but many of them are part of exchange programs. And what we're looking at is actually degree earning students from a variety of countries. But also something that you might have heard about is we've set up our first campus outside of India in Zanzibar. So we now have an IIT Madras at Zanzibar, and I can tell you later about, or Mahesh and I can talk to you later about the origins of this. But we now have a program where we've just started our first program there in Zanzibar. So there are students from East Africa who are now who've enrolled in both an undergraduate and a graduate program on data sciences that we're actually conducting. And over a period of time, we're actually going to bring together a few other programs that are very relevant to that region. There's a lot of infrastructure that Eastern Africa needs to develop. So there are programs on infrastructure, port development, etc. that are coming up. But for the first time, we've got a campus outside. The director of this campus is also an alumnus, Preeti Agalyam from the 1995 batch. And Preeti is the first director of any IIT in the history of the IIT, first women director of any IITs in the history of IITs in India. So that's again a very important milestone that we hold very dear, and she's done an absolutely fantastic job. And I've been telling everyone, if this is not on your bucket list of places to visit, put it right up there. Absolute pristine beaches, lovely history. The Serengeti is not too far away. Lovely food, things like that. There are lots of things that we're doing, trying to, like I said, attract the best students to campus and try to sort of see how we can sharpen them as best as possible. One of the things we're doing in terms of over the last few years, we've also been consciously looking outwards and not just inwards. So I've said we've got 11,000 students on campus, but compared to the population of India and compared to the student population of India, that's still a very small fraction. So the teaching that we do is impactful, but impactful at a very small scale. So the next big step was to say, how can we actually scale this for people who might be outside the IIT system? So we've introduced a Bachelor of Science program in data science, which is where you don't enter through the JEE. There's a different criteria to enter. It's an online program. And it's a very interesting program, but if you stay for 4 years, you get a BS. You don't get a BTech. For that, you still have to come through the JEE. But you get a BS. But the thing is, if you don't last all the way, there are several exit options. You can exit with a diploma, with a certification. And there are tens of thousands of students of all ages. I mean, I think the oldest person enrolled in this program, I heard, was 81 years old. And we've got people as young as 17 who've enrolled in this. So this is, again, a very powerful program that's taking IIT quality education out to the masses, and hopefully, given the success of this program, we'll start rolling out similar programs in other disciplines as well, so that at least the IIT quality teaching is available to people outside as well. And some of these are fantastic stories. I mean, you'll find, you can go to our website and look at this, but children of street vendors who would have had absolutely no ability to access this quality of education are actually not only accessing it, but certifying themselves through it, and therefore are availing of better job opportunities. And some of that has also been made possible through generous contributions from alumni who funded scholarships for these kinds of students and so on. So this is, so these are sort of new efforts that we're undertaking. Several of you are probably already familiar with the NPTEL program, the National Program for Technology Enhanced Learning, where again we take some of the courses that we teach and put them online for students from other universities to look at, and more importantly for teachers in other universities to look at and sort of be able to train their own students in sort of better ways. And again, the numbers are just mind-boggling. India is a large country, but the number of people who've been viewing these lectures, the number of people who've been taking advantage of the quality of teaching that we've been able to put out. So there's a lot happening in terms of trying to educate people outside the system and build more talent in the country. So the IITs were set up for nation building, and this is one of the ways in which we're trying to do this in the last decade or so. Inside campus, we have what is probably the most vibrant university-based innovation and entrepreneurship ecosystem in the country at the moment. And it's a carefully laid out ecosystem. We have several spaces on campus and in the curriculum now where students can ideate. There are courses on entrepreneurship that we teach. There are things like the Center for Innovation that I just told you about, where students can go in and just tinker. The motto of that center, by the way, is walk in with an idea, walk out with a product. And it's actually situated where the old carpentry and smithy workshops used to be. So those have now been converted into student-run Tinker Labs, right, where they come out and do whatever. Not everything is commercializable, but for those ideas that seem to have commercial potential, we have pre-incubation programs where we help students think through the business viability of what they're doing, provide them a little bit of funding along the way. There are several sort of mentorship schemes, and once they're done with pre-incubation and seem to have a validated product and business model, we have a very robust incubation system where again we provide space, funding, access to alumni mentors, things like this. And using that, many of these startups have scaled considerably. There are a few here as well today. You might have heard of a few others: Hyperverge, Aether Energy. Some of these have extremely large valuations. So the entrepreneurship ecosystem is doing exceedingly well. There are, as you can see, these are just some aggregate numbers. But the most, and this is a little bit of a dated slide. Some of those numbers need to be updated. But over the last decade or so, we've got upwards of, or close to about 350 startups that have come through. And most of them are in what we like to call the deep tech space. So relatively few are, e-commerce plays and websites and so on. Several of them work on things like underwater robotics, electric vehicles, things like this. So, highly impactful deep technology startups. There is also now a trend where we are seeing a lot of faculty research. There's an attempt to commercialize research that comes out of PhD thesis or the work that faculty do. So it's not just student innovation, it's faculty innovation as well. So there are lots of things that are happening that keep our students engaged and energized. And of course, I'm not going to be able to talk about everything, but this just gives you a little bit of a flavor of where we are. And finally, in terms of the actual research that happens on campus, again, several initiatives. We have something called, we were designated as an institute of eminence by the government of India. So a handful of universities were picked. And the idea was to say, look, can you guys double down on the kind of research that you're doing and try to see if you can then become one of the top universities in the world as far as research is concerned. So we've done extensive analysis and we've got about 35 odd centers of excellence that we've created. So out of thousands of areas in which we can do research, we've sort of identified 35 key ones that we're putting all our effort into, which most of our faculty are engaged in. But specifically, we've created 3 new exciting initiatives. So before I agreed to take on this role as the incoming Dean of Alumni and Corporate Relations, I helped start up IIT Madras' School of Sustainability. We realized that across 18 departments, we have over 150 faculty who work in the broad area of sustainability in some way, shape or form. And what the school does is it tries to build a platform to integrate all of these people to work on problems relating to climate, decarbonization, natural resource preservation, things like this. And the key sort of tenet of the school is to be as interdisciplinary as possible. So for instance, if you want to look at sustainable buildings. You want to bring the civil engineers, but you also want the mechanical engineers and the electrical engineers to come together. So there are lots of cross-disciplinary efforts that are both pushing, excuse me, scientific research, developing technology, implementing actual projects on the ground. There are several, for instance, lakes that we are restoring, things like this, but also impacting policy and corporate practice. So there are several committees and councils that our faculty are on that are trying to push the envelope of sustainable development in India. We recently started a school of artificial intelligence and data sciences, the Vadvani School of Data Sciences and AI. So this is again, we drew faculty from a variety of departments, starting of course with computer science, but we found there were faculty all over working on applying artificial intelligence to problems in various domains. So this is a new school that we've recently created that's now offering both an undergraduate and a graduate program in data sciences. So again, that's an area that we're doubling down on, and again generously supported by Sunil Vadvani, who was an alumnus from the 1974 batch. I always get that wrong. And we've also started a new department of medical sciences and technology. So for a long time, we felt that the boundaries between medicine and engineering have been blurring. In order to really be able to develop the next generation of healthcare solutions, medtech solutions, therapeutics, things like that, you need to be able to blend an understanding of mathematics and engineering along with an understanding of anatomy, physiology, and the human body. So this Department of Medical Sciences tries to blend both. This is not a department of a college of medicine in the sense we're not going to give MBBS degrees and create doctors, but rather what we're trying to do is create what we're calling physicianeers. So we have on the one hand faculty who are drawn from electrical engineering, biotechnology, engineering design, coming in from the engineering perspective, and we've got about a dozen practicing doctors who are what we call professors of practice, and together we've crafted a curriculum that is extremely unique in the Indian context, but also possibly likely to be highly impactful. So we have this new school of medical sciences and technology that we've created. So again, the common thread between all of these is we're trying to become as interdisciplinary as possible. Break down the old, you're an aerospace person, so you only look at these kinds of things. You're mechanical, you're chemical. The idea is we come together in interesting ways, which means we teach in interesting ways and start working on problems that are far bigger and grander than the ones that we typically worked on individually as faculty. So this is again something that we've got going on. Several other research initiatives that I won't have the time to talk about. Several of the things that we do are actually now being used in practice in India at scale. We have India's largest 5G test bed. So essentially decisions around 5G technology in India come out of IIT Madras. You might have heard of the Shakti processor, which is one of the first indigenous sort of microprocessor to come out of India. There are several startups. Neo Motion is an interesting one which builds wheelchairs for disabled people, but wheelchairs that do more than just transport, sort of also provide a lot of self-actualization, things like this. We also have, there's a lot of work that we're also doing, again, like I said, going outside the IIT system to try to see how we can impact the region, outside of IIT. Let me go, see if I can go back. So we have rural interaction centers that we've sort of set up in several villages. This slide shows numbers in Tamil Nadu and Uttar Pradesh, and we've actually then since set up some of these interaction centers in the northeast as well in Arunachal Pradesh. And the idea is again to see how we can impact these regions by, sort of delivering better quality education and content to them, things like this. So there's a lot of outward focused work that we are looking at in terms of nation building, primarily through research and things like this. So there are electronic kits, for instance, that we put together and give to these students and so on. Many of you who visited recently might have come to our IIT Madras Research Park, which is just as adjacent behind Mandakini Hostel. The Research Park is something I think that's unique. It was the first of its kind in India. Other universities are now picking on. So the whole thesis of the Research Park is it brings together a number of companies that are research oriented, but with a caveat. It's not just real estate. There is a commitment to collaborate with IIT Madras. And therefore, we find that there is a lot more of industry-institute collaboration. Companies are right next door, which means it's very easy for them to hop over a bridge that we've constructed to come and meet with us on campus. It's also easy for faculty to go in and work with industry. So there's a lot of industry-institute collaboration that's currently happening that has resulted in a number of startups and innovations, but is also one of the keys to why we've continued to be ranked as the #1 institute in the world, because it's not just the scientific research that's happening, it's also these kinds of industry outreach activities that we are conducting. Okay, so that's essentially where we are. But we also have a vision going forward. A couple of years ago, we created a strategic plan for the institute. So we've developed a fair amount of infrastructure in the past, but we are looking to develop more infrastructure in the future. So to modernize the campus as much as possible, while ensuring that we are sustainable, don't really mess with the green cover, the wildlife, and so on. So we're looking to create hostels, new recreational facilities, a new classroom complex, dedicated research equipment facilities, and so on. We need to sort of up our game a little bit on both the internationalization and the talent front. I mean, how do we get the, like the US attracted the best students from various parts of the world. The question is, how can we at IIT Madras attract the best students in Southeast Asia, in Eastern Africa, things like this. And just like ways, most of us came to the US on academic scholarships that allowed us to pursue our fields of study here. The idea is to see how can we sort of create structures and systems that can incentivize the best and the brightest from in and around India to come and study with us. And how do we get the brightest talent, both in terms of faculty and students, to come to IIT Madras from within India itself. And in terms of the research, we've, of course, we've got the AI school that was generously supported by Professor Sunil Wadhwani, but we also have to, by Sunil Wadhwani, sorry. And, but we also have to support our newly created schools of sustainability and schools of medical sciences and some of the other centers of excellence. One of the things that's been, again, a key driver of IIT Madras' growth has been generous support from alumni on all these dimensions. For instance, this sports complex that I showed you a picture of, or the Center for Innovation, the Innovation Hub as we call it, were all supported by generous contributions from alumni. We've got, so today if you look at the student body, there are several students whose parental annual income is less than 5 lakhs a year. And just to put that in context, if you're a family where one person was working as a maid and the other was working as a driver, roughly you're going to be making about 4.5 to 5 lakhs a month. So that is the kind of demographic from which students are actually able to clear the exam and come to IIT Madras. So through the support from alumni, we have this program that we used to call the Merit Cum Means Scholarship Program. We call it now the Bright Futures Program. Several of you have contributed to this, where we provide scholarships for these students, and that allows some of the brightest students in these categories to come to IIT Madras and successfully move on in life. So there are, but we've only sort of touched a fraction of them. So there's more that we need to do in terms of helping students and also helping faculty, particularly new faculty, women faculty that we want to sort of encourage to come to IIT Madras and so on. There's support required there. So many of these initiatives have been supported generously by alumni in the past, and we're hoping that alumni will continue to support us, believe in us, and stay with us through our journey in the future. Madhav will speak to you in a few minutes about ways in which that can be done. But I'll just like to close by saying IIT Madras is in a very sort of, it's sort of very interesting position at the moment. It's a great place to be. There's a lot of energy within campus. There are lots of initiatives. These initiatives we're sort of at the upswing of a hockey stick kind of curve, we feel, both in terms of the research we're doing, the impact that we're having, etc. We're extremely grateful to all of you who've also been part of the journey, first as students, then as supporters to the Institute, and we hope that you will continue to stay engaged with us going forward. Mahesh and I will be around to answer any more questions that you might have, both here during the session, but afterwards as well. And I'd also like to invite all of you to come and visit us on campus. Whenever you're in India, whenever you're in Chennai, just stop by, take a trip down memory lane, but we can also arrange for you to see some of these things that we are doing, because I think it's very important for us to have engaged alumni who understand and can support what we're doing, right? So thank you very much for all your support, and looking forward to interacting with all of you.